All right, if you could reintroduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Luke. I'm the secretary of the Communist Party club in Louisiana, and I'm here in Selma for the commemoration of Bloody Sunday Jubilee. I'm on assignment from People's World to write an article on the weekend, and you guys should all be reading peoplesworld.org.
So as you were pointing out, the Red Scare probably had a lot of people that have misconceptions about what the Communist Party stands for.
So, the Communist Party is very old. We've been around for over 100 years in this country. We're not some foreign influence, as we've often been characterized by
the 1930s, for example, you were a major force in politics.
And during the Civil Rights Movement, the Communist Party was, even before the Civil Rights Movement really kicked off, even during the abolitionist era and during the Civil War and the immediate post-Civil War era during Reconstruction, the Communist Party was one of the largest forces for abolition in the North and in the South during a lot of really risky organizing that a lot of very brave people did here in the South. There's a great book called Hammer and Hoe. It's about the history of black communist organizing in the South. And the Communist Party has first off, our main goal is liberation for working people. And the working class in this country is multiracial, it's multi-generational, and it's multi-gendered. And the multiracial aspect is especially unique to this country because of the history of segregation, because of the history of white supremacy. There's no way you can organize a broad, united working class in this country without addressing racism and addressing inequality, and both de jure inequality and de facto inequality that we see more today. I think, excuse me, sorry, the Communist Party has always been a force for racial equality in this country. And speaking of mischaracterizations of the Red Scare, another main mischaracterization, which is ironic because I'm a white Latino guy saying this, but there's often been this idea that the Communist Party was like a bunch of carpetbaggers, a bunch of white guys from the North coming down south, telling a bunch of Southerners what to do. That's
not the only ones to be accused of that is a white guy coming down from the south, north. But yeah.
But that's not the case. A lot of the strongest organizers in the Communist Party among the Black Liberation Movement were African Americans themselves. Names like Angela Davis, W.E.B. Du Bois, Jarvis Tyner, who's actually still with us today and is still a member of the party. The Communist Party has always been deeply intertwined with working class communities wherever they are, and that includes the black community, that includes my own community. There's been a long history of Latino and Chicano organizers in the Communist Party as well. So the Red Scare did a number on us. It did a number on us membership-wise. We lost a lot of people. A lot of people got scared of jail and prison time and getting fired and left the party, and it did a number on us rhetoric-wise, where I'd say it's getting a little better these days, but for a long time, your average American thought that communists were some sort of authoritarian, dictatorial force. That is not the case. We are quite the opposite of that. We believe in expanding democracy to the utmost extent. We have political democracy. We also want economic democracy.
I don't mean to interrupt. I said a couple of things I want to fit in. No, that's all right. That's all right. You're not the only one. It's not a communist. It's the only one. No, W.E.B. Du Bois was the subject of my senior thesis.
Oh, beautiful.
And as a case in point, he longed for utopian states. Liberia, for example. The problem with Liberia is a little like Palestine. For American slaves to come over and live there, they had to displace indigenous people. They're a problem. And the Soviet Union, of course, its excesses of despotism and tyranny was not the ideal model either. But I'm gathering from what you're saying, that isn't the Communist Party or the communist ideal that you're for. Communist China or the Soviet Union or perhaps even the Vietnams. I don't know. I don't put words in your mouth, but how do you distinguish between the excesses of communism and what you embrace?
So, first off, you have to understand what Marxism is. It's not a political philosophy per se. It's a methodology of thinking. Marxism is a way of viewing the world through a lens called dialectical materialism. The idea of that is look at humans as an animal species, right? We started as hunter-gatherers, and look where we are now. We have this broad global capitalism, this incredibly intensely detailed civilization. Other species don't do that. Bees have been building hives for all of their history, and all they've done is build hives. So why are we as a species constantly changing the way we organize in a way that other animals aren't? And the reason for that is class dynamics, and the way that we have to organize ourselves since the agricultural revolution has always split humanity into those who own and those who work. And that split has looked different in different eras. It could be feudal lords and serfs. It could be be slave master and slave. It could be your boss and you at your job. But the point is, class is the driving force of humanity. And the goal of communists is to create a society in the deep, deep long run where class is a non-factor, where humanity is one united thing, where we all enjoy the fruits of our labor to their utmost extent. However, that is a broad, long-term goal, and to get there is through building socialism. And what socialism means to me is
Bernie Sanders style socialism, perhaps.
to an extent. I mean, I think Bernie, some people like Bernie, people like Zoran, I think they are.
As you say, Zoran, another example. Yeah,
they're who we need right now. We are at a moment in American history where I don't think the working class in this country is organized enough and is ready for the true task of building socialism. But
are you aligned with the DSA?
I do a lot of work with the DSA. I would say there are the differences between us and the DSA are less ideological and more organizational. Our groups are internally organized very differently, but the DSA in Louisiana is a good allies with us. We work in a coalition with them. We work in a coalition with a lot of liberal orgs too, like Indivisible and 5051. But I think democratic socialism on brand of Bernie Sanders and stuff is a step in the right direction. How I always view it is I don't think reformism can bring us all the way to socialism. I think there is a ceiling to reformism where working within the system can only get you so far. But my opinion on it is working class people broadly will never perceive that ceiling, will never see the limits of reformism until they reach it. So my goal is anything that makes the lives for working people more tolerable and more survivable is a good thing. Any policy, any politician, any organization, any program, those are good things, because if we're scraping by to survive, then we're not going to have time to organize. We're focused on surviving. So do I think people like Bernie Sanders are the utmost ideal of what socialism could look like? No, but I don't think they're a hindrance. I think they're absolutely a benefit to the movement at large. I kind of got off topic.
Yeah,
I'll jump back.
Let me actually, something very fundamental that I think people would not guess about the Communist Party of the USA. You mentioned democratic socialism. Are democracy and communism anathema to each other, or are they compatible?
Oh, not only are they compatible, I think democracy is incompatible with the capitalist system. So I am.
So when you say we can't embrace the system as it stands, it's because the system is corrupted by capitalism. There's another model of democracy in which the people have a say and which government has a positive role. Is that part of what you're saying?
I put it this way. Let's take a look at how capitalism functions. Under capitalism, to use a very Marxist-y term, the means of production, but that's anything. That's stores, that's factories, that's railroads, anything that requires labor to create value. Like a railroad track on its own has no extra value beyond what it is. But the minute you start putting workers on it who are moving items and moving freight, then all of a sudden that railroad has a lot of value. It generates value. Because that's privately owned, that value just goes into the hands of whoever owns it. It is capitalism just funnels wealth into fewer and fewer hands. And wealth isn't something abstract. Wealth is power. If you are rich, you can pay people to do things that you want them to do. You can pay off politicians. You can buy other companies. You can monopolize. Yes, we have anti-monopoly laws, but how much are those really working when media is about 3 companies that own everything? Food is about 3 companies that own everything. So what I'm getting at here is if you have a democratic system within a capitalist economy like we have now, there's a limit to how democratic it can actually be if wealth can override people power. So we look at Congress.
Let me stop you right there. Sure. So with that in mind, if there's a limit to what democracy can do, people's fears about communism is you will install a dictatorship or something that is less than democratic, which the people don't have a voice. And you're going in the direction, perhaps, that answers that. But again, how do you address that? So democracy is broken as it is right now. Are you advocating building something that is a non-capitalist, of the people, by the people form of democracy? Or you're not saying in the interim we have to have a dictatorship or something to get there?
No, I think expanding democracy to its utmost extent is the goal of communists, and I would even say is the goal of communists in the past. We look at places like the Soviet Union, which was an incredibly flawed experiment in socialism, but these were people who were trying to do something for the first time ever. So they made a lot of mistakes, and those mistakes resulted in very, very serious.
And ironically, North Korea and North Vietnam were very much built originally on fairly democratic systems. They were more democratic than their southern counterparts. Something went wrong, but the communism behind it was not the problem. It sounds like it was the way it was implemented.
Yes, and I'd even say that. Communists we're not supposed to be dogmatists. So when we look at places like Vietnam or the Soviet Union or North Korea or any example of people who've attempted to build socialism, it is in our interest as organizers to look at their mistakes, learn from their mistakes, and not repeat them. We're not dogmatists. We see people apply this theory to reality, and we look at the things that worked and we look at the things that didn't work, and we can cast away the things that didn't work and keep the things that did.
So what about post-Batista Cuba? What about Castro? Were some of the things that he hoped to realize through communism actually realized?
Yeah. Yes, I've actually been to Cuba. I went to Cuba in 2016 during that brief period of time where Obama made it a little easier for Americans to travel to Cuba. And so for a little backstory on me, my background is I'm a second generation American. My family are immigrants. They came from Costa Rica, and I've been to a lot of Latin America. Latin America, with some exceptions, is pretty universally impoverished. So what I saw in Cuba wasn't poverty that I haven't seen before in Latin America, but what I saw in addition to that poverty was a lot of structures and systems in place that allowed Cuba in some areas of social life, in some areas of living conditions, to outpace countries that are far wealthier than Cuba.
What about Costa Rica's near neighbor of Nicaragua?
Yes.
What about the story there?
So yeah, Nicaragua had the Sandinista revolution. There was a civil war in Nicaragua. Similarly to Cuba, I think you could point at the Sandinista movement and say there were things that they did well, there were things that they made mistakes in. But importantly for me, I'd say, is the Sandinistas, as much as a lot of individual Sandinistas are inspirations to me. Ernesto Cardenal comes to mind, the priest and poet, massive inspiration to me. He was a Sandinista. But the Sandinistas were not communists. They were socialists for sure, but they were ideologically different from the Cuban Revolution. And I think there's a reason that for all the flaws of Cuba, the Cuban socialism has maintained a much more socialistic economy than Nicaragua has been able to, and that's because of the organization of the Cuban Communist Party.
Excuse me, I'm trying to keep us to 15 minutes so people will listen to us. No, it's my fault too.
I'm such a rambler.
No, I am long-winded as well, so I cannot be self-righteous. So, examples of communist parties that defy the stereotypes. For example, in parliamentary systems in Europe, where they are part of a coalition, are communist parties embracing democracy, embracing compromise, and the other things that are fundamental to democracy?
Absolutely. I think a big example in Europe is Portugal. The Portuguese Communist Party was the driving force behind the April Revolution that toppled the Estado Novo, that was the fascist dictatorship in Portugal. It's the oldest political party in Portugal, and it's a major party in the system. It's not a fringe niche party. In Portugal, the Communist Party is considered one of the major parties within parliament. And they haven't sacrificed their socialism, they haven't sacrificed their radicalism, but they have worked within the modern liberal parliamentary system with cohesion within the rest of the system. And I think there is lessons to be learned from them. There's lessons to be learned from the KKE in Greece, from the Communist Party in Cyprus also. There's a lot of communist parties in Europe that do engage in electoral politics, do engage in parliamentary politics, and haven't sacrificed their revolutionary zeal. So the Portuguese Communist Party, yes, they engage in parliament, yes, they join coalitions. In fact, they currently are in a coalition with the Greens. But at the same time, they still organize unions, they still organize strikes, they still do real direct workers' power. And I think that's an example of one of the modern iterations that the communist movement has taken that we can learn from here in the United States.
A little over 15 minutes, but the 14-minute mark. So I will have you on for a full hour on my podcast. Okay. But Africa, Asia, any examples there of positive manifestations of communism, either as a ruling party or as a coalitional party?
So I think you're making a mistake, not you literally, you, the royal you. You're making a mistake if you point at any political movement, including socialist movements, but any political movement, and say, this movement is all good, this movement is all bad, there's nothing to take from this, there is things to take from that. So when I look at Asia, I think the examples that jump to mind for me are Vietnam. in the modern age has developed itself with a pretty solid social safety
So
net.
Laos and Cambodia as well, aren't they
Yeah,
still?
well, Cambodia less so, but Laos. Laos is
Yep.
is Cambodia. They had the Khmer Rouge, which I do not classify as a communist
Okay.
movement. Despite him calling himself, Pol Pot
Right.
called himself communist, we fund the
Pol Pot
the
is not
CIA
a member
funded
of your
them.
party as far as
Pol
you're
Pot
concerned.
would not be allowed in the CPUSA.
Oh, okay.
But Vietnam is an example of a society that has, I think, built a pretty robust socialist system. It's flawed, of course. Humans are
Well,
flawed.
a fairly robust capitalist. I mean, the
As well.
economy
Well,
is
yeah.
thriving. The
That is
skyscrapers are everywhere.
So there's an idea in Marxist theory that there's stages of development that societies take, and capitalism is not some mistake that we should have erased. Capitalism is a necessary stage. Capitalism is what built up industry. The Industrial Revolution happened, and there wouldn't be a modern industrial working class if capitalism never happened. So what places like Vietnam and China are doing when they do have market economies within their socialist system, the idea is the starting point they're coming from was these rural, agrarian, colonized countries. They can't have a socialism run where the industrial working class are the leaders of the society if there is no industrial working class. So they have industrialized using market economies because that's how it's done. But there are genuine shifts to socialism. For example, in China does have a market economy. China does have massive corporations, but the wealth generated by the Chinese economy is property of the people. It is not it's not privately owned in the same way wealth generated in the American economy is. So there's a lot that China does that on a personal level I'm like, not for me. I wouldn't do that. I wouldn't implement those policies. But I do think China's an example of socialistic success.
We'll skip to Africa. We have a chance to summarize, and then again, we will have longer discussions.
Of course,
I assure
of course.
you.
Invite
I will
me
come to
anytime.
New Orleans.
Please do.
I need
Please
lots
do.
of reasons to come to New Orleans. So Africa, Zimbabwe, I think, was fairly really socialist.
Zimbabwe, to an extent, Angola was a big one.
Angola, very much so,
Was
yeah.
another big one.
Ghana, perhaps? I don't
Kwame
know.
Ture and not Kwame Ture, my God, Nkrumah in Ghana was a socialist leader and he was
First
main-
independent republic in
created
Africa.
independent Ghana, exactly. So I think you can. A lot of the fact that we have independent African states from the decolonial period post World War II, a lot of the impetus for that was because of socialist organizing within Africa.
Yeah.
And
Socialism is inherently anti-colonialist. Is that right?
It has to be. Colonialism is the antithesis to sovereignty and liberation for working people. And there are a lot of places in Africa, Burkina Faso is another example, that saw their most successful period under communist leadership, under socialist leadership. And in the years following that, a lot of those socialist governments were toppled, whether by military coups that were often funded by France or funded by the United
Doesn't
States.
help that these were artificial boundaries drawn by
course,
colonial
yes.
powers,
These boundaries
devoid
don't
of
actually-
ethnic realities and all kinds of other things.
Exactly.
So-
There's a lot of circumstances in Africa that has created sort of a perpetual cycle of poverty in the continent. But there are moments in African history where we've seen bits of that cycle break, and almost every single time those moments in African history were under the leadership of African socialists and African communists.
So we can't leave out South America, Venezuela,
Yes.
Chile.
Yes. Well, Venezuela is an interesting example because Venezuela that had the Chavista movement, the Bolivarian Revolution, that was led by the PSUV. The PSUV are actually not an explicitly communist party. I actually have some respect for Hugo Chavez. I think Maduro, different story, but Hugo Chavez I do have some respect for. But there is a communist party in Venezuela, the PCV, and they are currently actually in opposition to the PSUV. But if you look at other countries in South America, like the MAS movement in Bolivia under Evo Morales, that was also not a communistic movement, it was a generally socialist movement. But I think some of the greatest gains we've ever seen in terms of liberation of peoples in the South American continent have been in Bolivia under Evo Morales' leadership. Bolivia is the only country in the entire American continent that's majority indigenous. And despite that, Bolivia long had a political class that was of European descent.
Right.
And Evo Morales' MAS movement, which was effectively an indigenous movement, kind of broke that. And even since then, despite MAS not being in power anymore in Bolivia, the involvement of the indigenous community in Bolivia in politics has exploded to a point where they can't go back. There is a lot of the major unions in Bolivia are led by indigenous folks, and this has created a political climate where the ruling class of Bolivia, or at least what was the former ruling class of Bolivia, no longer can just do whatever they want and get away with whatever they want and step all over the lands of the indigenous.
I did a really interesting radio program on indigenous people worldwide, how it relates to Native American struggles here. The Northeast India is basically all indigenous peoples. Many places in Africa and other places. But anyway, that's a whole other discussion. So let's end on Chile. 50 years ago, early 70s, a socialist regime was overthrown by a right-wing regime, and eventually democracy on some level was restored. What's the history vis-a-vis the Communist Party in Chile?
Well, the Communist Party in Chile was supportive of Allende, who was the socialist leader of Chile before the Pinochet regime overthrew him. But Chile, to me, is a bit of a tragedy. Chile has long had one of the most robust, organized socialist movements in the world, let alone the American continent. But the Pinochet regime was incredibly repressive to the left. To the extent of throwing communists out of helicopters.
Yep.
And of course, the Pinochet regime is over. It is not in power anymore, but the remnants of it are still around. For example, Chile still uses the constitution that was drafted under the Pinochet government.
Oh, really?
Yes, and there was a referendum a couple years ago to change the constitution, and it was one of the most mass, direct democratic processes ever. They went around to communities all over Chile. Everybody had an input on the new constitution, but the right put up a incredibly financially funded, well-funded fight against the new constitution, and it did not pass. So Chile is still using a constitution that was written by one of the most reactionary regimes ever. So Chile is a strange case where they have an incredibly strong socialist movement and an incredibly organized working class, but they are fighting such an uphill battle against a political establishment that was basically created during years of fascism.
So many socialist experiments that ultimately failed, but because of implementation, not because of the principles underlying.
Yes.
Yeah.
They often fail because of interference from the United States.
Right. So the United States, featuring the Communist Party here, especially in the current regime, isn't there a danger we will return to a Red Scare, to a time when expressing views like you're expressing become dangerous? And on the more optimistic note, the pendulum often swings. Everybody thinks we're in this moment, we're here forever. And of course, things like the Supreme Court and other things are going to have generations of influences. We don't want to underestimate that. On the other hand, we are here in Selma, Alabama, 1965. 5 months later, they passed the Voting Rights Act. Nobody could have seen that coming. Gay marriage is another example. As a gay man, I would never have guessed that same-sex couples can marry as soon as they did.
I would even call back to the election of Zoran in New York recently.
And Zoran is another case. So anyway, in your most optimistic view, where could the Communist Party be, say, 50 years from now in the United States?
In my most optimistic view, I think the Communist Party has a political philosophy that has not been exposed to the masses to the extent that we wanted to. But in a world where people like me do our work well, we're good organizers, we get the word out,
right.
I can see the Communist Party being a genuine leader for working people in this country.
And for communities of color, your own community, the Latino community, African American, Asian American,
anybody who
Native
works
American.
for a living. If you are a working person.
And working class, white people, for that matter.
All work. The working class is broad and diverse. It includes all those groups.
I call it the Queens Coalition, the kind of folks who marched down Astoria Avenue, I think it is. Just briefly, St. Patrick's Day parade. St. Patrick's Day is upon us. They wouldn't allow gay people to march in Manhattan, but they did in Queens. And who joined us? The 110 ethnic groups that comprise Queens, and then working class white guys. We often exclude from. We often, unfortunately, alienate them in the course of these movements that, of course, are we need to advocate for Black Lives Matter, but that doesn't mean that white middle class guys don't matter.
See, I think the way we advocate is by advocating on class issues. The example I like to use in regards to race is, America is a white supremacist country. There was an ideology of white supremacy that has governed a lot of the decisions made by places of power in this country. But at the same time, race is a social construct. Race isn't really real, there's no actual dividing line. These people are white, these people are black. That's all socially constructed over time. And so you can't if something's not real, you can't really oppress people utilizing something that's a social construct. So how does white supremacy function in real life? It functions through class. It functions through black people having often worse schools in the neighborhood, often less access to jobs, less access to financial information that people in white people often have access to. So in reality, the way white supremacy is enforced is through class. So the way I look at it is class is the weapon of all oppression. You can't oppress people without pushing them into a lower social class.
Yep.
So if we fight on for...
So I mean, the elephant in the room that we didn't even talk about is in the last, certainly 50 years, but certainly the last 10 years, the wealth divide. The amount of wealth in this country that is owned by the top 1% is staggering compared to the rest.
It's criminal.
And so we got to do something about it. People say, but communism, socialism is the result. How do you answer those folks? How do you say that you are indeed part of the solution?
Well, the way I like to answer it is, if not us, then who? Because I think people look at communism as something of an other. Like, it's something outside of my life. It is this, like, mysterious European ideology. But no. What communism is it is the political... It is the interests of the working class made into a political movement. So if you are a working person, you may not self-identify as a communist, you may not be well-read in Marxist theory, but I can guarantee you that the communist movement is fighting on your behalf. They're fighting for your interests. So I think, in my opinion, the way we get past a lot of that propaganda and a lot of that Red Scare era brainwashing is just by being good communists. Being out here, doing good work, helping our community under the label of communism. Because it's hard to say the communists are scary, evil, bad guys when the communists are in my neighborhood feeding my neighbors and helping protect people vulnerable to deportation in my neighborhoods. How can they be the villains? So to get past that sort of propaganda, it's on us. It's on communists to be good at what we do, to be good organizers, to do good work, to involve ourselves in our communities, and to not be afraid and not be ashamed of what we believe. I think there is an impulse, because of what you're talking about earlier with that fear, people are scared. Even people who consider themselves communists are often scared to be communists in public because there's a fear of reprisal. That fear is so limiting, we have to get over that. If you are a socialist, if you are a communist, it is important that you do the work under that label, because there's no way we can expand this movement to the point it has to be for us to win if we are hiding who we are. You know, we already get accused of being subversive.
Yeah.
Why be subversive?
So we're having this discussion at the Tabernacle Baptist Church, an iconic institution, along with Brown Chapel, the Baptist Bridge, all these other institutions in Selma. And we really will end here. But, yeah, for your brother in the African-American community, things are so bad right now that potentially not an assimilationist approach is appropriate here, but a radical approach. An approach that says things are so bad, we can't be stuck in the status quo. We really have to do something different. I imagine that's the kind of thing you're advocating for.
Yeah, when I hear people say things like that, my assumption is either they're a socialist or they would be a socialist if they listened and they heard the right advocates for socialism. Because I think there is a general yearning from working people for something other than what we have.
Yeah.
And I think that yearning isn't random. It's not just from the ether. I think that is people responding to their material conditions that they live in. And the reality is, capitalism doesn't work for working people. We are cogs in a machine. We are not masters of our own destiny under the capitalist system. So that sense that is very apparent in the black community, but I'd argue is apparent in all working communities, that this isn't working. This isn't working for me anymore. That sense is the start of class consciousness in the minds of people.
Yeah.
That if people followed that scent, if they just kept going and followed it, they would find themselves in the world of Marxism.
Absolutely. So, we're just under half an hour. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this, I'm going to try to get a room full of people who probably never see themselves in any way as sympathetic to the Communist Party. I think when they hear you, they will get some of the points of commonality, some of the history. As it relates to Du Bois and
Absolutely.
to Bear Rustin and other folks within African American communities. So I think what you said is very helpful. But how do people get in touch with you if they want to find out more?
So the CPUSA is a national organization.
Do you mind giving out an email address or some way to get in touch with you, or would you rather
with
not?
Me personally, I could. If you are based in Louisiana and you want to reach out specifically to the Louisiana Club of the Communist Party, you can reach us at cpusa.louisiana@gmail.com. You can find us on Instagram at cpusa_LA.
People who see this Wisconsin may want to reach out specifically to you. Is there a safe way that you can give us?
Our club email, cpusa.louisiana@gmail.com. I have access to that email, so does the chair of our club, and so do a few other people in the Central Committee.
And your name once again, please.
Luke.
Luke, hey, it's been a great pleasure.
You too. Nice to meet
Thanks.
you, man.
All right, you too. Just a second.